The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Zoe Taylor's apartment as she hurriedly packed her volunteer supplies into her tote bag. At 34, Zoe had mastered the art of making the most of her weekends. Every Saturday morning, she taught financial literacy classes at the Westside Community Center before handling her personal errands. Today's class had gone especially well. The room had been packed with eager learners, from teenagers to retirees, all wanting to understand how to build credit and save for their futures. Zoe loved these moments, sharing knowledge that had taken her years to accumulate through hard work and determination. Remember, your credit score is like your financial reputation, she had told them, her voice warm and confident. It takes time to build, but it opens doors you didn't even know existed. After the class, Zoe glanced at her watch. She still had time to stop by Parkview National Bank before lunch. She needed to discuss some issues with her accounts and perhaps talk about upgrading to their premium services. She had been a customer there for years, even though their main branch downtown was closer to her office. She preferred supporting businesses in the neighborhood where she grew up. Zoe didn't bother changing out of her jeans and simple blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore minimal makeup. Comfort over fashion was her Saturday motto, quite different from her polished weekday appearance. The bank was surprisingly busy for a Saturday. Zoe took a number and sat down in the waiting area. She scrolled through emails on her phone, occasionally looking up when a new customer was called. She couldn't help but notice that several people who arrived after her were being served before her. Despite the numbered system, after waiting 45 minutes, Zoe approached the receptionist, a young woman with a nervous smile. "Excuse me. I've been waiting quite a while. My number was 34 and you just called 42, Zoe said politely. The receptionist flushed. "Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me check." She tapped at her keyboard, avoiding eye contact. "It looks like there's an opening with Mr. Reynolds now. He's our branch manager. I'll let him know you're coming." Zoe was directed to a glass office at the back of the bank. A middle-aged man with graying temples sat behind an imposing desk. His nameplate read, "Thomas Reynolds, branch manager." He didn't look up when she entered, continuing to type on his computer. "Have a seat," he said without greeting her. "How can I help you today?" Zoe settled into the chair across from him and placed her account information on his desk. "Good morning. I've been having some issues with my accounts that I'd like to discuss, and I'm also interested in your wealth management services." Reynolds finally looked up, his eyes quickly scanning Zoe, taking in her casual clothes, natural hair, and simple tote bag. His expression shifted subtly. "Wealth management?" He chuckled, the sound condescending rather than friendly. "Those services are typically for our more established clients." Zoe raised an eyebrow but maintained her composure. "I understand. I'd still like information about them. I've been banking here for over 10 years. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. 10 years? That's strange. I don't recall seeing you here. I usually use the ATM or mobile banking, but I've been a customer since college, Zoe explained. I see. Reynolds pulled up her account information, his eyes narrowing as he scrolled. Well, Ms. Taylor, your accounts don't exactly qualify you for our premium services. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at First Community Bank down the street? They specialize in basic checking accounts and have more flexible requirements. The implication hung in the air. Zoe felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling she got whenever someone made assumptions about her, based solely on her appearance. Could you explain what the requirements are for your wealth management services? She asked, her voice deliberately even. Reynolds sighed as if explaining something to a child. Our wealth management services are designed for clients with significant assets and investment portfolios. Clients who wear suits to meetings, not gym clothes. A woman walking past the office slowed down, clearly overhearing Reynolds' comment. She glanced in with wide eyes before hurrying away. Zoe straightened in her chair. I'm not wearing gym clothes, Mr. Reynolds. And I'd appreciate it if you could focus on my accounts rather than my appearance. Look, Reynolds said, lowering his voice and leaning forward. This is a bank for serious clients with serious money, not a check cashing store. I'm just being honest with you. Based on what I'm seeing here, he gestured at his screen, and what I'm seeing here, he gestured at her clothing. You might want to start with our basic financial literacy workshops before thinking about wealth management. The bank had grown quieter. Zoe realized several people, both customers and employees, were watching the interaction through the glass walls of the office, though they quickly looked away when she noticed them. Zoe took a deep breath. 20 years ago, she might have reacted differently, with anger, tears, or by simply walking away. But those days were long gone. She had learned that sometimes the best response to ignorance was calm confidence. "Mr. Reynolds, I'd like to speak with your supervisor," she said. Reynolds let out a short laugh. "I am the supervisor, Ms. Taylor. I'm the branch manager." "Then I'd like the contact information for your regional manager," Zoe responded. Her voice firm but not raised. Reynolds' smile turned cold. "Of course, though I'm sure she'll tell you the same thing I have." He scribbled a name and number on a business card and slid it across the desk. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No, thank you. You've been very informative." Zoe gathered her papers and stood up. The entire interaction had taken less than 10 minutes, but it felt much longer. As she walked through the bank toward the exit, she noticed the hushed conversations and uncomfortable glances from both customers and staff. One young bank teller, a black woman not much older than 20, caught her eye and gave her a small, sympathetic nod. Outside, Zoe stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the sun warm her face. She pulled out her phone and checked the time. Her lunch meeting was in an hour, plenty of time to collect her thoughts. A tap on her shoulder startled her. It was an elderly woman who had been sitting in the waiting area. "I saw what happened in there," the woman said, her eyes kind behind thick glasses. "That man has always been rude, but what he said to you was beyond rude. It was wrong." "Thank you," Zoe said, touched by the stranger's concern. "Are you going to report him?" the woman asked. Zoe looked down at the business card in her hand. "Yes, but I'm going to do something more effective than just filing a complaint," the woman smiled. "Good for you, dear. Don't let people like that steal your sunshine." Zoe watched the woman walk away, her cane tapping rhythmically on the sidewalk. The encounter had restored some of her faith in humanity, which Reynolds had temporarily dented. She made a quick decision and dialed a number on her phone. "Hey, Ben," she said when her assistant answered. "Could you move up that meeting with the Parkview National Executive Team?" "Yes, the one about our company accounts. And add something to the agenda. I'd like to discuss their branch management and customer service standards." She paused, listening. No, it just became a priority. "Also, could you pull together some data on their diversity initiatives? Or lack thereof?" "Thanks." Zoe put her phone away and walked to her car, her head high. Reynolds didn't know who she was yet, but he would soon. Not because she wanted revenge, but because people like him needed to learn that their assumptions and prejudices had consequences. As she drove away from the bank, Zoe's mind was already formulating plans, not just for addressing Reynolds' behavior, but for creating meaningful change. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination wasn't outrage, but strategic action. And if there was one thing Zoe Taylor excelled at, it was strategy. The upcoming week would bring surprises for Thomas Reynolds and Parkview National Bank. Zoe smiled at the thought. Sometimes life delivered perfect opportunities to turn painful moments into powerful lessons. Zoe's Monday morning began like any other. She woke at 5, completed her workout, reviewed the morning financial reports, and arrived at her downtown office by 7:30. Her corner office on the 32nd floor of the Harrington Tower offered a breathtaking view of the city, including, she noted with a small smile, the Parkview National Bank headquarters 6 blocks away. Her assistant Ben knocked lightly on the open door, carrying her usual black coffee. "Morning, boss," he said, placing the coffee on her desk. "How was your weekend?" "Educational," Zoe replied, thinking back to the encounter at the bank. "Very educational." Ben raised an eyebrow but knew better than to press for details. "The Parkview National meeting is confirmed for Thursday at 10 a.m. Their CEO, Patricia Wilson, will be there along with their chief financial officer and head of retail banking." "Perfect," Zoe said, taking a sip of her coffee. "And what about the other information I asked for?" Ben handed her a folder. "Everything you wanted to know about Parkview's diversity initiatives or, as you correctly guessed, their lack thereof." He hesitated. "Can I ask what this is about? You've never shown much interest in Parkview's internal policies before." Zoe considered how much to share. Ben had been her assistant for 3 years and had earned her trust. Let's just say I had an interesting experience at their West Side branch on Saturday. The kind of experience that makes you wonder how a bank can succeed in today's world with such outdated attitudes. Understanding dawned on Ben's face. Say no more. Do you need anything else for Thursday's meeting? Yes, Zoe said, her mind already mapping out her strategy. Pull the numbers on all our accounts with Parkview, and contact HR for the diversity breakdown of our executive team and senior management. I want those numbers side by side with Parkview's. After Ben left, Zoe turned to her computer. She had always been thorough in her research, a trait that had served her well throughout her career. Now she began digging deeper into Parkview National Bank. Founded in 1952, Parkview had grown from a small local bank to a regional powerhouse with 50 branches across 3 states. Their marketing materials proudly displayed their history and commitment to community. But as Zoe scrolled through their executive team photos on their website, she noticed something telling. Among the 23 executives and board members, only 2 were people of color, and just 5 were women. She then pulled up the demographic data for the West Side neighborhood where she'd encountered Reynolds. The area was predominantly Black and Hispanic with a growing Asian community. Yet the bank's leadership looked nothing like the communities they served. Zoe wasn't naive. She knew the banking industry had a diversity problem. It was one of the reasons she had worked so hard to reach her current position. At 34, she was one of the youngest chief financial officers in the city, and one of the few Black women in such a role nationwide. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How did the bank visit go? Did you sort out those account issues? Zoe smiled. Her mother, a retired school teacher, had always taught her to stand up for herself, but to do so strategically. Working on it, she texted back. We'll tell you all about it at Sunday dinner. The rest of Zoe's day filled up with meetings and calls. As the newly appointed CFO of Harrington Investments, one of the largest private equity firms in the region, her schedule was always packed. But throughout the day, her mind kept returning to Reynolds and his condescending smile. By Tuesday afternoon, she had compiled a comprehensive report on Parkview National's performance, diversity metrics, and community engagement scores compared to their competitors. The picture wasn't flattering. Their community reinvestment numbers are abysmal, she told Ben as they reviewed the data. They're doing the bare minimum required by law in the neighborhoods that need it most, including Westside. Ben nodded. And look at their customer satisfaction scores broken down by branch location. The downtown and suburban branches score consistently higher than those in minority neighborhoods, almost as if they provide different levels of service depending on where the branch is located, Zoe said. Her suspicion confirmed by data. She spent Wednesday preparing her presentation and strategy for the Parkview meeting. This wasn't just about her personal experience anymore. The data had revealed a systemic problem that affected thousands of people in communities like the one she'd grown up in. That evening, Zoe drove to her parents' modest 2-story home in Westside for their weekly dinner. The neighborhood had changed over the years, some parts improving while others struggled, but it still felt like home. Her father, a retired postal worker, was tending to his vegetable garden when she arrived. He straightened up when he saw her, his face breaking into a proud smile. There's my girl, he said, giving her a warm hug. Your mother's inside fussing over the pot roast. Over dinner, Zoe finally shared the story of her encounter with Reynolds. The nerve of that man, her mother exclaimed, putting down her fork. After all these years, some things never change. You should have seen his face, Zoe said. Looking at me like I was in the wrong place, like I couldn't possibly have enough money to matter to his precious bank. Her father shook his head. I remember when that branch opened. 1987. They made all these promises about supporting the community, giving loans to local businesses. Your mother and I were so hopeful. And then they turned down every Black business owner who applied for a loan, her mother added, including your Uncle Ray when he wanted to expand his repair shop. Zoe hadn't known this part of the story. Is that why Uncle Ray never grew his business? Her father nodded. He had to take out a high-interest loan from one of those predatory lenders instead. Nearly bankrupted him. The conversation gave Zoe even more motivation for Thursday's meeting. This wasn't just about one rude bank manager. It was about decades of practices that had held back her community. As she drove back to her downtown apartment that night, she thought about her journey. From the bright kid who won the state math competition to the scholarship student at the state university, to getting her MBA from Harvard Business School. She had worked twice as hard as many of her peers, aware that she didn't have the same margin for error that they did. Her first job in finance had been challenging, being both young and black in a predominantly older, white male industry meant constantly having to prove herself. But she had persisted, climbing the ladder through talent, determination, and strategic thinking. 3 months ago, when Harrington Investments had recruited her as their new CFO, it had felt like a validation of everything she'd worked for. The position came with significant influence. Harrington managed billions in assets and invested in everything from real estate to technology startups. What Reynolds didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, while looking dismissively at her casual Saturday clothes, was that Zoe now oversaw financial decisions for one of the most powerful investment firms in the region, a firm that happened to keep several $100 million in accounts at Parkview National Bank. Thursday morning arrived with a light rain. Zoe chose her outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit that projected authority without being flashy, and her grandmother's pearl earrings for a touch of personal strength. As her driver pulled up to Parkview National's headquarters, Zoe reviewed her notes one last time. She wasn't out for revenge, that would be too small a goal. What she wanted was change, real change that would benefit her community. "Ready, Ms. Taylor?" Ben asked as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. Zoe nodded, her expression resolute. "More than ready. It's time Parkview National learned who they're really dealing with." The elevator doors opened to reveal an impressive reception area with views of the city skyline. The receptionist greeted them warmly and led them to the main conference room where the Parkview executives were already gathered. Patricia Wilson, Parkview's CEO, rose to greet her with a firm handshake. "Ms. Taylor, we're delighted to finally meet the new CFO of Harrington Investments. We value our relationship with your firm tremendously." "I'm glad to hear that," Zoe replied with a pleasant smile, "because after our meeting today, I believe that relationship is going to change significantly." The Parkview executives exchanged confused glances as Zoe took her seat at the table, opened her portfolio, and prepared to speak. The Parkview National Conference Room fell silent as Zoe began her presentation. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the faces of the 6 executives seated around the polished table. Patricia Wilson, the CEO, watched Zoe with curious eyes, clearly wondering about her cryptic opening statement. "As you know," Zoe began, her voice steady and professional, "Harrington Investments currently maintains several accounts with Parkview National, totaling just over $300 million. She paused to let the number sink in. "We've been considering consolidating our banking relationships, and I wanted to meet with you personally before making any decisions." The executives visibly relaxed. This was familiar territory, a valued client considering changes, but nothing alarming. Patricia Wilson smiled confidently. "We certainly appreciate your business, Ms. Taylor," she said. "I'm sure we can address any concerns you have about our services." Zoe nodded and continued. "Before we discuss the future of our relationship, I'd like to share a personal experience I had at one of your branches." She recounted her visit to the Westside branch in detail, the long wait while others were served ahead of her, Reynolds's dismissive attitude, and his thinly veiled suggestion that she didn't belong in a bank for serious clients. As she spoke, the expressions around the table changed. Patricia Wilson's smile faded, replaced by a look of growing concern. The head of retail banking scribbled furious notes. The chief financial officer stared at his hands, visibly uncomfortable. "Now," Zoe said, "I understand that one employee doesn't represent an entire organization, which is why I took the time to look more deeply into Parkview's practices." She pulled up the first slide of her presentation, a map of the city with Parkview's branches marked in red. Next to it, she displayed the demographic breakdown of each neighborhood. "Your branches, in predominantly white, affluent neighborhoods, have more staff, shorter wait times, and higher customer satisfaction scores than those in diverse communities like Westside," Zoe explained, cycling through data-filled slides. "Loan approval rates follow the same pattern. Your own numbers show that qualified applicants from minority neighborhoods are approved at significantly lower rates." The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "Ms. Taylor, while we appreciate your thoroughness, I'm not sure how this relates to Harrington's accounts with us." Zoe fixed him with a steady gaze. "It relates directly. Harrington Investments is committed to working with partners who share our values of fairness and inclusion. Based on my findings, both personal and data-driven, I have serious concerns about whether Parkview qualifies. Patricia Wilson leaned forward. Ms. Taylor, if you experience poor service, I apologize sincerely. That's not what we stand for at Parkview. Isn't it, though? Zoe asked, pulling up another slide showing the bank's leadership team. Your executive team and board are 87% white and 78% male, despite serving communities that are incredibly diverse. Your community reinvestment numbers are barely meeting legal requirements, and based on my experience Saturday, at least some of your managers feel comfortable openly discriminating against customers based on their appearance. A heavy silence fell over the room. Patricia Wilson looked genuinely troubled. I wasn't aware of these disparities, she admitted finally. This is concerning. The head of retail banking, a middle-aged man named Gregory Phillips, spoke up. Which branch did you say this happened at? And who was the manager? The West Side branch. The manager's name is Thomas Reynolds, Zoe replied. Phillips and Wilson exchanged a glance that Zoe couldn't quite interpret. We should address this specific incident immediately, Phillips said, reaching for his phone. In fact, let me call Mr. Reynolds right now and have him join us. Zoe hadn't expected this development, but she remained composed. That would be fine. While Phillips stepped out to make the call, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Patricia Wilson tried to salvage the situation. Ms. Taylor, I want you to know that we take these allegations very seriously. If what you're describing is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt you, it represents a serious failure on our part. Zoe appreciated the CEO's directness. I believe in giving organizations the chance to correct their course. Ms. Wilson, that's why I'm here today instead of simply moving our accounts elsewhere. 20 minutes later, the door opened and Phillips returned with Thomas Reynolds in tow. Reynolds looked confused and slightly nervous, his eyes darting around the room until they landed on Zoe. For a moment, he stared blankly, not placing her in this new context. Then recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by alarm. Mr. Reynolds, Phillips said formally. Do you recognize Ms. Taylor? Reynolds swallowed hard. Yes. She came into my branch on Saturday. And how would you characterize your interaction with her? Phillips pressed. Reynolds glanced nervously at Zoe, then at the executives around the table. It was a standard customer service interaction. Zoe raised an eyebrow but said nothing, allowing the tension to build. Patricia Wilson turned to Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Taylor has shared some concerning details about her visit to your branch. She states that you kept her waiting while serving other customers who arrived after her, made assumptions about her financial status based on her appearance, and suggested she would be more comfortable at a check cashing store rather than a bank for serious clients. Would you care to respond to these allegations? Reynolds' face had gone pale. There must be some misunderstanding. I would never— Mr. Reynolds, Zoe interrupted calmly. Are you suggesting I'm lying about what happened? No, of course not, Reynolds backpedaled quickly. Perhaps my words were misconstrued or taken out of context. Phillips folded his arms. What context would make those comments appropriate, Thomas? Reynolds looked trapped. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized the severity of the situation. I may have made some unfortunate assumptions, he admitted finally. Saturday was very busy, and what you don't seem to understand, Patricia Wilson cut in, her voice sharp, is that Ms. Taylor is the Chief Financial Officer of Harrington Investments, one of our most valuable clients. The color drained completely from Reynolds' face. He looked at Zoe with new eyes, no longer seeing the casually dressed woman he had dismissed, but recognizing the powerful executive who controlled hundreds of millions of dollars in accounts. I had no idea, he stammered. That's precisely the problem, Zoe said, speaking directly to Reynolds for the first time. You shouldn't need to know someone's job title to treat them with basic respect and fairness. Every person who walks into your bank deserves the same level of service, whether they're wearing casual clothes or a three-piece suit, whether they have $10 in their account or $10 million. Reynolds seemed to shrink under her gaze. Ms. Taylor, I sincerely apologize for my behavior. It was completely unprofessional and inexcusable. Zoe turned to Patricia Wilson. The issue here isn't just about one bad manager or one unfortunate incident. It's about a culture that allows, perhaps even encourages, this kind of discrimination. Mr. Reynolds felt comfortable treating me that way because he believed there would be no consequences. Wilson nodded slowly. You're right, and that's on us, on me, as leadership. She turned to Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, please wait outside. We'll discuss this further after our meeting with Ms. Taylor. After Reynolds had left, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Wilson turned back to Zoe. What would you like us to do, Miss Taylor? I understand if you want to move Harrington's accounts elsewhere. Zoe considered the question carefully. She could simply punish Parkview by taking her business elsewhere, but would that create the change she wanted to see? I'm not interested in just pulling our accounts, she said finally. That might make me feel better momentarily, but it wouldn't solve the underlying problems. She leaned forward, meeting Wilson's eyes directly. What I want is meaningful change. I want Parkview to commit to a complete overhaul of its practices, from hiring and promotion to community investment and customer service standards. I want regular reporting on your progress, and I want to see real consequences for discriminatory behavior. Wilson looked surprised but thoughtful. That's quite a request. It's an opportunity, Zoe corrected her. An opportunity for Parkview to become a leader in inclusive banking. And if you take it seriously, Harrington won't just keep our accounts here. We'll increase them. The executives exchanged glances, clearly calculating the costs and benefits of what she was proposing. You mentioned your personal connection to Westside, Wilson said. Would you be willing to advise us as we develop these new initiatives? Your perspective would be invaluable. It was Zoe's turn to be surprised. She hadn't expected the CEO to be so receptive. I would under certain conditions. I'll have my team draft a formal proposal for what that partnership could look like. As the meeting concluded, Patricia Wilson walked Zoe to the elevator. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm truly sorry about your experience. And I'm grateful you brought it to my attention rather than simply taking your business elsewhere. Zoe nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to do better, Ms. Wilson, including Parkview National. As the elevator doors closed, Zoe felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that she had been heard, hope that real change might come from this ugly incident, but also weariness at having to fight these battles at all. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ben. How did it go? She smiled slightly as she typed her response. Phase 1 complete. They're shaken up. Now let's see if they're serious about making changes. The elevator reached the lobby and Zoe stepped out, her head high. She had turned what could have been just another painful encounter with discrimination into an opportunity for institutional change. That, she thought, was the real victory. Not seeing the look on Reynolds' face when he realized his mistake. Satisfying though that had been. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds as Zoe headed to her next meeting. There was still much work to be done, but today was a good start. 2 weeks after the confrontation at Parkview headquarters, Zoe sat in her office reviewing the formal proposal that had just arrived from Patricia Wilson. The thick document outlined a comprehensive plan for transforming Parkview National's practices, from hiring policies to community investment. Ben knocked on her door, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You've been reading that for an hour, he said, placing a cup on her desk. Good news or bad news? Zoe looked up, a cautiously optimistic expression on her face. Surprisingly good. They're not just making superficial changes. Wilson has put together something substantial. She flipped through the pages, pointing out key sections. Look here. They're committing to a complete audit of customer service practices across all branches, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, and a new community reinvestment fund specifically for neighborhoods like Westside. Ben raised his eyebrows, impressed. And Reynolds? Reassigned, Zoe said. He's been removed from management and put into their corporate training program, where he'll be required to complete extensive diversity and inclusion education before he can work directly with customers. Again, is that enough? Ben asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. After what he did? Zoe considered the question. I thought about pushing for his termination, she admitted. But firing him wouldn't fix the system that made him feel his behavior was acceptable. This way, he has a chance to learn and change, and the bank shows they're serious about rehabilitation, not just punishment. Ben nodded slowly. You're probably right. So what happens next? Next, Zoe said, closing the proposal. We hold them accountable. I'm meeting with Wilson and her team tomorrow to discuss implementation and timeline. And then on Saturday, she smiled slightly. Saturday? I'm going back to the Westside branch. The Westside branch of Parkview National Bank looked different on this Saturday morning. For one thing, there was a new sign in the window announcing extended hours and upcoming financial literacy workshops. For another, the receptionist who greeted customers was a young black woman Zoe hadn't seen before. "Good morning," the receptionist said warmly. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to speak with the branch manager, please," Zoe replied. "Of course. May I tell her who's asking?" "Zoe Taylor." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Ms. Taylor, yes, of course. Please have a seat and I'll let Ms. Chen know you're here." Zoe sat in the waiting area, noticing other small changes in the branch. The walls now displayed artwork from local artists, and the brochures in the rack included information about first-time homebuyer programs and small business loans specifically for minority entrepreneurs. A few minutes later, a woman in her early 40s approached with an extended hand. "Ms. Taylor, I'm Lisa Chen, the new branch manager. It's an honor to meet you." Zoe shook her hand. "New manager? What happened to Mr. Reynolds?" Lisa hesitated, clearly aware of the history. "Mr. Reynolds has been reassigned to our corporate office. I took over this branch 10 days ago." "I see. Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" Lisa led her to the office that had previously belonged to Reynolds. The furniture was the same, but the space felt different, warmer somehow, with family photos on the desk and a small plant in the window. "I understand you had a very negative experience here," Lisa said once they were seated. "On behalf of Parkview, I want to personally apologize." Zoe nodded, appreciating the gesture but more interested in substance than apologies. "I notice some changes have already been made," Lisa smiled. "Yes. We're just getting started, but we've been given a mandate from headquarters to transform how this branch serves the community." She pulled out a folder. "We've hired 3 new staff members from the neighborhood, extended our hours to accommodate working people's schedules, and started planning a series of free financial education workshops." "That's good to hear," Zoe said. "What about lending practices?" "That's a bigger shift, but it's happening," Lisa assured her. "We've been given new guidelines for loan applications that focus on overall financial stability rather than just credit scores, which we know can disadvantage communities that have historically been underbanked. And we've been allocated an additional $5 million specifically for small business loans in this zip code." Zoe was impressed despite her initial skepticism. "It seems Patricia Wilson took our conversation seriously." "More than you know," Lisa said. "The changes aren't just happening here. They're being implemented across all 50 branches. She calls it the Taylor Initiative internally." Zoe felt a strange mix of emotions, pride that her stand had made a difference, but also a lingering sadness that it had taken her status and financial leverage to create changes that should have happened long ago. As they continued talking, a commotion in the lobby caught their attention. Lisa excused herself to check what was happening. Through the glass walls of the office, Zoe could see an elderly man arguing loudly with one of the tellers. He was waving a piece of paper and pointing angrily at his account statement. Lisa approached him calmly. "Sir, is everything all right?" "No, it's not all right," the man shouted. "I've been banking here for 30 years and suddenly you're charging me fees I've never seen before." Zoe couldn't hear Lisa's response, but she watched as the manager listened attentively, then guided the man to a private desk area where they sat down together. Lisa examined his statement, made a few notes, and then picked up a phone. After a brief conversation, she said something to the man that transformed his expression from anger to relief. When Lisa returned to the office 10 minutes later, Zoe raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Account error," Lisa explained. "He was incorrectly moved to a different account type during our system update. I fixed it and refunded all the fees, plus added a courtesy credit for his trouble." "You handled that well," Zoe observed. Lisa shrugged modestly. "That's just good customer service. Every person who walks through that door deserves respect and attention, regardless of their account balance." She paused. "Which brings me to something I wanted to ask you." "Yes?" "Ms. Wilson mentioned you might be willing to help us develop some of our new community initiatives. We could really use your insights, especially for the financial literacy program." Zoe hadn't decided yet how involved she wanted to be with Parkview's transformation. Part of her felt it wasn't her responsibility to fix their problems. Another part recognized the rare opportunity to create meaningful change from the inside. "I already volunteer teaching financial literacy at the Westside Community Center," she said. "I'm not looking to take on additional commitments." Lisa nodded, understanding. "Of course, I didn't mean to impose," Zoe thought for a moment. "But I would be willing to review your program materials and perhaps help train your staff on how to teach effectively. Financial concepts can be intimidating if not presented properly." Lisa brightened. "That would be incredibly valuable. Thank you." As they wrapped up their conversation, Lisa walked Zoe to the door. Near the exit, Zoe noticed a young black teller, the same woman who had given her a sympathetic nod during her previous visit. "That's Tanya," Lisa said, following Zoe's gaze. "She's been promoted to senior teller and is training to become an account manager." Zoe made a small detour to Tanya's window. "Hello?" Tanya looked up, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Miss Taylor, it's good to see you again. You remember me?" "Of course," Tanya said quietly. "That day with Mr. Reynolds. Well, a lot of us wanted to say something, but we were afraid to. I'm sorry I didn't speak up." "It's not your responsibility to fight other people's battles," Zoe assured her. "I heard you got a promotion. Congratulations." Tanya smiled. "Thank you. Ms. Chen has been really supportive. She's helping me enroll in night classes so I can get my finance degree." Zoe felt a wave of satisfaction. This tangible impact on real people's lives was what made her confrontation worthwhile. "Keep up the good work," she told Tanya. "The financial world needs more voices like yours." On Sunday evening, Zoe sat at her parents' dining table recounting her visit to the Westside branch. "So they actually made changes," her father said, impressed but still skeptical. "Let's see if they last." "That's why I agreed to stay involved," Zoe explained, passing the bowl of mashed potatoes. "To make sure this isn't just a temporary response to bad publicity. The only way things truly change is when people like us have seats at the table." Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, honey. Not just for standing up to that man, but for turning it into something positive for the whole community." "I just hope other banks are paying attention," Zoe said. "This shouldn't have to happen at every institution one by one." Later that night, as Zoe drove back to her apartment, her phone rang. It was Patricia Wilson. "Ms. Taylor, I hope I'm not disturbing you on a Sunday evening," the CEO said when Zoe answered. "Not at all. What can I do for you, Ms. Wilson?" "I wanted to let you know that the board unanimously approved our complete reform package today. Full funding, accelerated timeline, everything we discussed." "That's excellent news," Zoe said, genuinely pleased. "There's more," Wilson continued. "We're creating a community banking advisory board to provide ongoing oversight of our practices, and we'd like you to consider joining it. You wouldn't be representing Harrington in this role. We want your personal expertise and perspective." Zoe hadn't expected this development. "That's a significant commitment." "It is," Wilson acknowledged. "But your insight these past 2 weeks has been invaluable. You understand both the financial world and the communities we've been failing to serve properly. We need voices like yours if we're going to get this right." Zoe promised to consider the offer. As she pulled into her apartment building's garage, she reflected on how differently things had turned out than she'd initially expected. What had started as a humiliating encounter with yet another prejudiced bank manager had evolved into an opportunity to create systemic change. Reynolds' mistake, assuming she didn't belong in a bank for serious clients, had ironically opened the door for her to help reshape what banking could look like for thousands of people in communities like Westside. Sometimes, Zoe thought as she rode the elevator to her floor, the best revenge wasn't watching someone regret their actions, it was making sure those actions led to positive change that would outlast the momentary satisfaction of seeing someone squirm, and that kind of revenge felt pretty good too. 6 months had passed since that fateful Saturday when Zoe Taylor walked into the Westside branch of Parkview National Bank. On this crisp autumn morning, she stood across the street watching people come and go from the bank with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The branch looked different now. The once sterile facade had been renovated with warm colors and large windows that made the space feel more inviting. A new sign announced Parkview National Banking for All Communities, alongside a calendar of upcoming financial workshops. As Zoe crossed the street, she checked her watch. She was running a few minutes early for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Today marked the official launch of Parkview's Small Business Incubator Program. an initiative that would provide low-interest loans, free business counseling, and dedicated workspace for entrepreneurs from underserved neighborhoods. Inside, the bank was buzzing with activity. Staff moved about, arranging chairs and setting up refreshments for the event. Tanya, now a junior account manager, spotted Zoe immediately and hurried over. "Ms. Taylor, so glad you made it," she said, her confidence noticeably grown over the past months. "Everyone's in the community room. Let me take you back." The community room, formerly an unused storage space that had been transformed into a modern meeting area, was filled with people. Local business owners mingled with bank employees, community leaders, and press. In one corner, Lisa Chen was speaking animatedly with Patricia Wilson, who had become a regular presence at the branch since the transformation began. Wilson noticed Zoe enter and excused herself to greet her. "Ms. Taylor, perfect timing," she said warmly. "We're about to get started. Would you mind saying a few words during the ceremony? This program wouldn't exist without your influence." Before Zoe could respond, a familiar figure approached from across the room, looking markedly different from their last encounter. Thomas Reynolds, dressed more casually than Zoe had ever seen him, gave a hesitant nod of greeting. "Ms. Taylor," he said, his voice lacking its former condescension. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here today." An awkward silence hung between them until Wilson spoke. "Mr. Reynolds has been instrumental in developing the training components of our small business program," she explained. "His background in financial planning has proven valuable once properly redirected." Reynolds looked uncomfortable but determined. "I owe you an apology," he said to Zoe. "A real one, not the rushed words I offered when I was first confronted. These past months have been educational." Zoe studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding none. "How so?" she asked simply. "After our meeting at headquarters, I was given a choice," Reynolds explained. "I could leave the bank or I could commit to the new direction, which meant confronting my own biases and changing how I work with people." He paused. "I chose to stay and learn. Part of that learning was being assigned to help develop this program with community leaders I would have previously dismissed." Zoe nodded, appreciating his honesty, if not fully ready to forgive. "And what have you learned?" Reynolds looked thoughtful. "That I was part of a system that worked for people who looked like me and often failed people who didn't. That my success wasn't just about my hard work, but also about advantages I took for granted. And that good banking isn't about keeping certain people out. It's about helping more people in." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was a start. "The program looks promising," Zoe said, changing the subject. "How many businesses will it support?" 20 in the first round," Reynolds replied. "Including your Uncle Ray's auto repair shop. He's receiving one of our first expansion loans." Zoe couldn't hide her surprise. "My uncle applied?" "Actually, I sought him out," Reynolds admitted. "After hearing his story during one of our community listening sessions, his business plan is solid, but he was repeatedly denied financing over the years. That's exactly the kind of situation this program is designed to address." Before Zoe could process this unexpected development, Lisa Chen called everyone to attention for the start of the ceremony. The next hour passed in a blur of speeches, applause, and the ceremonial cutting of a ribbon. When called upon, Zoe spoke briefly about the importance of financial institutions truly serving their communities. She carefully avoided mentioning the incident that had sparked these changes, focusing instead on the positive path forward. After the ceremony, as people enjoyed refreshments and networked, Zoe slipped away to call her uncle. "Why didn't you tell me you were working with Parkview on expanding your shop?" she asked when he answered. Uncle Ray chuckled. "Wanted it to be a surprise, sweetheart. That bank manager, Reynolds, came to see me himself." "Imagine that," said they were making amends for past practices. "At first I told him to get lost, but then he came back with Lisa Chen and some paperwork showing they'd revamped their whole lending system." "And you trust them now?" Zoe asked, still protective. "Trust is a strong word," her uncle replied. "Let's say I'm giving them a chance to prove themselves. Besides, the terms they offered beat anything else I could get. With this loan, I can finally add those 2 service bays I've been dreaming of for 15 years and hire a couple more mechanics from the neighborhood." After saying goodbye to her uncle, Zoe rejoined the event, viewing it with fresh eyes. Around the room, she saw other business owners like her uncle, people with dreams and plans who had previously been shut out of traditional financing. Patricia Wilson approached as the crowd began to thin. The Community Banking Advisory Board is meeting next week to review our first quarterly results, she said. The numbers look promising. Loan approvals in minority neighborhoods are up 47%. New account openings have increased by 35%. And customer satisfaction scores at previously underperforming branches have improved significantly. That's impressive progress, Zoe acknowledged. It's just the beginning, Wilson said. We're implementing these changes across all our branches, and other banks are starting to take notice. 2 of our competitors have reached out to learn about our new models. As they talked, Zoe noticed a young black couple sitting with Tanya at one of the desks, signing papers with excited expressions. Tanya caught her eye and gave a subtle thumbs up. First-time homebuyers, Lisa explained, joining their conversation. They were previously told they didn't qualify for a mortgage, but under our new assessment criteria, they're excellent candidates. They'll be closing on a house in Westside next month. Zoe felt a wave of emotion, thinking about all the families like this one who would now have opportunities previously denied to them. Opportunities to build wealth, establish roots, and strengthen their communities. Later that afternoon, Zoe visited her parents to share the day's events. Her mother set out coffee and homemade cookies. In the living room, as Zoe described the ceremony and her conversation with Uncle Ray, "I still can't believe that Reynolds' man is still working there," her father said, shaking his head. "After what he did, I had mixed feelings about it too," Zoe admitted. "But in some ways, having him stay and change is more meaningful than just firing him and replacing him with someone else." The problems at Parkview weren't just about one person. They were systemic. Her mother patted her hand. "You always did see the bigger picture, even as a little girl. Remember when the school wouldn't let you join the advanced math program? Instead of just fighting for yourself, you gathered evidence that lots of kids from our neighborhood were being overlooked." Zoe smiled at the memory. "And now they have a lottery system for the program instead of relying on teacher recommendations which were biased." "Exactly," her mother said proudly. "You understood even then that changing the system helps more people than just fighting individual battles." As the afternoon sun cast warm light through the living room windows, Zoe's phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a reporter at the city's business journal requesting an interview about her role in Parkview's transformation. "Are you going to do it?" her father asked as she showed them the email. Zoe thought for a moment. "I think I will. Not to take credit, but because stories like this need to be told. People need to know that speaking up can lead to real change." That evening, as Zoe drove home, she took a detour past the Westside branch one more time. The lights were still on, with a financial literacy workshop in progress. Through the windows, she could see a diverse group of people, young and old, from various backgrounds, gathered around tables with worksheets and calculators. She remembered teaching similar workshops at the community center, often wondering if her efforts were making enough difference. Now, she was seeing change on a scale she hadn't imagined possible 6 months ago. What had started with one painful encounter with discrimination had evolved into a transformation affecting thousands of lives. Reynolds' mistake, underestimating her based on her appearance, had triggered changes that would continue to ripple outward long after that Saturday morning was forgotten. Zoe put her car in drive and continued home, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. There was still much work to be done at Parkview and beyond, but tonight she would celebrate the progress made. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful response to discrimination wasn't just proving the other person wrong. It was using that moment to create a better system for everyone. And perhaps that was the greatest regret Thomas Reynolds now lived with. Not just that he had insulted an influential woman who could affect his career, but that his worldview had been so narrow he couldn't see the human potential in front of him, not just in Zoe, but in all the customers he had misjudged over the years.